right, I'm back. We had a little photo bomber. Take this where I was and move it a little bit. So genes provide the instructions for proteins. That's like the end all deal. And in this case, if you look here, genes are providing the instructions. This is a case of the color of the kernel of a corn, and it's actually the outer layer that actually colors it. So the yellow corn is actually just clear, and the purple coloring is when the cover is purple. Okay, so this is genetics. There's a gene that says if the corn is going to be purple or if the corn is going to be yellow. And it is kind of cool because on the first cross, this would be the parent cross, you have an example of a purple corn, which is dominant, being crossed with a clear, and that's recessive. So this would be the parent generation. So big R with little r. Our F1 cross results in all heterozygotes. But because purple is dominant, the F1 cross and this big R, they don't look any different. But what's really kind of cool is if then you do an F1 cross, you are able to tell the, basically you can count the ratio and you're going to end up getting a phenotypic ratio of 3:1. 3 purple, because big R is a purple. 2 big R, little r. This is also purple. So you're going to have a 3 purple to 1 little r. And we have these corns in the classroom. I kind of quit doing this because it's a tedious assignment because you have to count every one of these kernels. But you can say indeed if this corn is a result of an F2 cross by how many purples are actually present. Is it a phenotypic ratio of 3:1? So here's a table talk. Which statement, and remember table talks are test questions, which statement about an individual that is homozygous for an allele is not true? I would pause it if you want to think about it, but let's look at these answers. I'm just going to kind of keep going and we're going to look at the answers. Each of its cell possesses 2 copies of that allele. Its parents were necessarily homozygous for that allele. That one doesn't make sense. They don't need to be homozygous even if the individual is homozygous. It can pass that allele to its offspring. Well, it not only can, it will. So that one's true. It is true breeding with respect to that allele. What true breeding means is that it can only give that allele. That is also true. So I feel like A is correct. Each of its cells possess 2 copies of that allele. C is correct. And D is correct. So this one. Because you could have both parents being heterozygotes like this. And each parent could end up giving its little r. And we could have a homozygous, or it could give its big R. All right, so the law of segregation. We normally do a hands-on thing because these 2 things, the law of segregation and you learned about the law of independent assortment last unit, they get confusing. But let's just do the law of segregation right now. Every organism inherits 1 allele from each parent. That's basically the key word here is that you get 1 allele from each parent, right? You get the allele from the sperm from your dad and the allele from the egg from your mom, okay? So during meiosis, the alleles will segregate. That's when we're making our egg and sperm cells. The homologous chromosomes separate, and each allele for the trait gets packaged into a gamete. Okay, so that's what we're showing here, that this maybe was mom, and each allele got put into a separate gamete. And maybe this was dad, and each allele got put into a separate gamete. This would show you if they were heterozygotes. All right, so here they are, the homologous chromosomes. The homologous chromosomes separate, and the alleles are packaged into separate gametes. Okay, now the next step with the law of segregation is sure, we separate these into, that was kind of going off the independent assortment, but what makes the law of segregation a little bit different is that it deals with what you get from each parent. An individual receives 2 factors, one from each parent, if you see it right here. So one of the things is that let me kind of go up, but I really wanted you to focus on this red. During gamete formation, the alleles will separate so that the gamete only carries one allele. You're only dealing with one trait in order to observe the law of segregation. All individuals receive 2 factors, one from each parent. So here's the parent. These alleles will separate and they will get one of these from the offspring will get one of these. Now, the one thing you've got to remember is this law of segregation occurs at the same time as the law's independent assortment during meiosis 1, metaphase 1. Okay, so again, the Punnett square shows us the law of segregation, right? The gametes are separating. The alleles separate into different gametes, and then we end up with the offspring. He's always got to inherit one from dad and one from mom. Okay, so the law of segregation can be demonstrated by our fabulous Punnett square. All right, now, again, this is simple enough, but it's so easy to get confused with the law of independent assortment. But during the formation of gametes, those are egg or sperms, the 2 alleles responsible for a trait separate from each other, and then they are recombined during fertilization. That's the key. You have one trait, those alleles get separated so that when you have the offspring forming, you get only one allele from each parent. Okay, so if we were looking at our corn, basically the chromosomes with alleles for corn colors separate into 2 different gametes. And the next generation will only receive 1 copy from dad and 1 copy from mom. Here you have the parent generation. The big R's are going to separate. The little R's are going to separate. The new generation will always get 1 copy from mom and 1 copy from dad. Okay? Here's your big table talk. The law of segregation states blank. I would pause it if you want to try to answer this on your own, but let's look at these answers. The genotype segregates from the phenotype. I don't think so. Genes on different chromosomes sort independently. That sounds a heck of a lot like independent assortment. All individuals receive 2 factors, 1 from each parent. I really like this one. This should say all alternative genes segregate from each other and remain distinct. That's just I'm not even sure what that's saying. So C is the answer. C as in cat. All right.